just pop in there, because just for those who are not anthropologists and don't know any of this,
Yeah.
what are those? What are the big paradigms that you were kind of bumping into and
Yeah.
going to
Well,
some sort of?
that's what I'd come
Yeah.
into. Now, anthropology was, in one sense, it's back to the Greeks. Many of the Greek philosophers were anthropologists, and certainly through the Middle Ages and through the Pascal, and but many people date it from Montesquieu and the Enlightenment. And anthropology has gone through a series of paradigms. I think your viewers will know what a paradigm is. It's a meta cosmology. It's a spirit of the age which informs a number of disciplines at a lower level. So you can have a paradigm like the one I'll talk about, functionalism, and then you can have functionalist biology, functionalist engineering, functionalist linguistics, functionalist anthropology at a lower level. So it spreads right across disciplines. And leaping forward to the founding of modern anthropology, which is in the later half of the 19th century, the people like E.B. Tylor and Haddon and people like this, the paradigm then was evolutionism. And this, of course, embraced biology, Darwin, and sociology, Herbert Spencer, and so on. So it went right across. And this paradigm was that the way we understand a society is to see where it is placed on a ladder of evolution, from the simplest to the most modern and complex and sophisticated. This was a form which was developed from the Enlightenment theorists. Adam Smith and others had a sort of evolutionary, or progressivists. They believed that societies progressed. The evolutionists believed that it was a very steep evolution from the simplest to the most complex. And this paradigm dominated anthropology till the First World War.
Mm.
And then after the First World War, during the First World War, Malinowski and Radcliffe Brown in the Andaman Islands, and one or two American anthropologists, Boas and others, started to do sustained fieldwork where they left behind this evolutionary theory and looked at actually existing societies in depth through spending, in Malinowski's case, several years, because he was trapped on the Trobriand Islands, being an unwanted alien there. And they spent this time and they absorbed a new paradigm that was spreading over all the disciplines, and this was functionalism. Functionalism is a very satisfactory paradigm for anthropologists. Ernest Gellner used to say that it was a paradox. I mean, functionalism, he pointed out, is a misguided theory. It's the idea that everything has a function and that functions are the only way you need to look at things. And as he said, this is all nonsense. On the other hand, as he said, it led to this wonderful fieldwork and many of these wonderful monographs. So the results were great, even if the method was faulty. Anyway, the basic idea of functionalism is that if you want to see the meaning of something, you find out what it's doing, what its function is. So it was an analogy with a car, which were just being invented at that time. So if you want to know the function of the steering wheel, you see what a steering wheel does in relation to the engine and the wheels and everything like that. So what does the part play in the whole? That is functionalism. And what it immediately released was an ability to compare societies without making moral judgments. Up till then, we were the best, they were just primitives. Now we did the same thing as them. I mean, after all, they had witchcraft, we had psychiatry. What's the difference? They had gambling, we had the stock exchange. What's the difference? So it leveled out societies and made it possible to, without value judgments, compare kinship systems, economic systems, and so on across societies, and to explain why things are as they are. They are, so witchcraft is a religious type of explanation for why things happened. We have Christianity, they have witchcraft, you know, both equally nonsensical, but there we are. Anyway, that was functionalism. Now, Malinowski was the extreme functionalist, and in the 1930s, people said they noticed what Gellner noticed, which is that it's over extreme. You need it. It's very individualistic, and it concentrates on the bits. You need something bigger. You need to place this within a structure, and so you had for about 20, 30 years a sub-paradigm called structural functionalism. And structural functionalism was the sort of thing that Maya Fortes and Jack Goody and a number of anthropologists did. And that says we're interested both in the function of things, but also in the wider structure of a society. So you look at the kinship structure, not just as a function, but as a building. So it slightly enriches functionalism. And that was the paradigm into which I slipped without any kind of real explanation of what it was and what it was trying to do. But Raymond Firth was a structural functionalist, and all my teachers were. And that was fine until the bombshell of the 1960s, or two bombshells. One was structuralism. Now, unfortunately, while Maya Fortes was talking about structural functionalism, along came this thing called structuralism, which was championed for political as well as other reasons by his arch enemy, Edmund Leach. And so Edmund Leach and Maya Fortes had a famous controversy about what was the meaning of kinship. Was it in relationships of a structural kind, or was it in descent? And behind this was a difference, all sorts of differences. But one of them was the difference between a structural, in the French sense. Again, Ernest Gellner brilliantly summarized it in one sentence. He said the difference between these two, and if only they'd realized, was between the word structure, which in English means a building or a structure, and structure in French. And structure is entirely different. What structure means is relationships. It's what I talked about previously in the case of Montesquieu and the spirit of the laws. Montesquieu, Tocqueville, Durkheim, Mauss, Lévi-Strauss, and modern French structuralists, Derrida and Foucault and all these people, Bourdieu. This French tradition says, if you want to understand the meaning, you can't look at a thing. You have to look at a thing in relation to something else. It was taken from another French thinker, the great sociolinguist or linguist, de Saussure. De Saussure's theory, and also from a Irish, actually, mathematician, Boole, and Boolean mathematics. De Saussure said in linguistics, you have the meaning of an item in linguistics is in the relation between the signifier, which is, say, the word rose, and the signified, which is a rose. And that relationship, he says, is the sign. So it's not A, the rose, or the word rose, it's relationship. The linguistic sign is A/B, and it's the slash. Now, that is the basis of structuralism, and it's the idea that is implicit in all French philosophy and different from English utilitarian and positivist philosophy. And it's also the difference between civilizations, because some civilizations are structuralist and some civilizations are functionalist and positivistic. The Anglosphere, the British and the American philosophical tradition and social structure and concepts of the self are functionalist and individualistic. France and the whole of the Catholic continental tradition, and even more extremely, China and Japan and India, and Nepal, and even more extremely, natives living in the Amazonian jungles, studied by Levi-Strauss, and to a certain extent in Burma, studied by Edmund Leach, are structuralists. So most of the world is structuralist, but there are these peculiar pools of individualist civilizations. And so when these anthropologists started arguing in the battle between structuralism and functionalism, it was about two parts of the world and two visions of meaning. And it still lies behind our world now. To understand China, you have to, first of all, you have to understand that it's a structuralist civilization, not like ours. Now, the added dimension that Levi-Strauss added to this, I mean, he added various things. One was that it's not just the relations between A and B, it's the relations of the relations. Evans Pritchard talks about this. Mary Douglas thought he was a structuralist, and there are elements of his thought which are. But basically, and you can, the easy example of this is in the yin-yang system of China. Yin is male, and it's the sun and light and white and right-handed and so on and so on and so on. And yang is all the opposite: black, night, left, water, and so on and so on. And it's not just each opposed to each other, but the set of them. And so in one of Levi-Strauss's best works, Savage Thought, La Pensée Sauvage, he arranges South American thought in these columns of binary oppositions. Now, the final additional force was given to Levi-Strauss's ideas, and I think they wouldn't have been quite as impressive if they hadn't absolutely chimed in the 1960s, when he's developing or became famous, with the development of the computer. Because the whole of computing in the West, until very recently, the Turing revolution, is based on oppositions. It's based on binaries, digital on-off switches. And so Levi-Strauss makes the analogy with a computer, and he takes it even further. And this is where I think he goes too far. He says our minds are binary. Basically, our minds are like computers. We think through logical oppositions all the time. And therefore, if you want to understand how the world works, you have to realize our minds are conditioned to be binary machines. Now, that is a very good way to understand, for example, China or Japan. Some of the most of the best works on both China and Japan are by French anthropologists and French thinkers, because they intuitively understand it. But it doesn't work here. I mean, some French tried to turn English culture and society into and analyze it on Levi-Straussian terms, and it just doesn't work. I mean, we have black and white and left and right, Oxford and Cambridge, all these things, but it doesn't get you very far. It doesn't feel right, and it isn't right. So I have never been a structuralist, really, except when I go to places where I do most of my fieldwork, where you have to understand that this is a structural civilization. And the final paradigm I'll mention is Marxism, because it's odd that it took so long in a way, but Marxist thought flooded into history just around the time I was doing my degree. So a number of the best anthropologists like Christopher Hill were being influenced, Eric Hobsbawm, E.P. Thompson, were all very much influenced by Marxism. And a lot of the medievalists, nearly all of them, were influenced by Rodney Hilton and people like that. But just a little bit later, perhaps 10 years later, it came into anthropology. Again, often from France, Emmanuel Terray and people like that, Maurice Godelier. These were very powerful theoreticians in the Marxist tradition. Marxism was even stronger in France than in Britain. And again, it refreshed the discipline because it gave it a unity, because a sort of crude Marxism of the kind that early came on said that, you know, as in the Marxist tradition, you can relate everything ultimately back to the infrastructure of the material relations of production, and societies and ideologies are generated from the bottom up from that. And that gives a sort of linking between the levels of society. And so in this, I suppose in the 70s, Marxism was most dominant in British anthropology. And it began to fade out in the 80s and 90s. And then you got into this odd period, which I don't know where it's gone since, which is postmodernism, and the idea that you don't have paradigms, the post-paradigm age. You know, there is no overarching theory.